Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Rooted in Flame Volcanic Wines of the Ancient World. Sorry, we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty there, which if you've been with us for a while is it's actually kind of minor by by comparison. But we're really excited about this club tasting and this club overall. It's I think just sort of visually one of our more stunning ideas. And also just we love these kind of thematic connections that can be drawn between the ancient world and kind of natural world and mythology. And I think this was kind of Dana's idea originally. Going back a while, we've been wanting to kind of figure out a way to do it. Really excited to have Pietro Buttita with us tonight, whose wine is featured in the club as well. This is actually our first foray outside of the Mediterranean world for a wine. So even though we're talking about it, exploring some of the different ancient connections, this is the first time we've actually done it. So and we're thrilled to have him on board. Long time friend of the club and collaborator. Done a lot of work together over the years. Kind of you probably got a sense, those of you who have the write-ups, but for those of you who don't, the idea here is that we took three different volcanic regions, and explored kind of the mythological connections between the volcanism in these areas and the mythology and the geography. So it came out, I think, pretty well. We'll be visiting tonight Mount Etna in Sicily, followed by the Canary Islands, and then last of all, we'll be looking at California and Oregon for the last part. So just a couple pictures to get you warmed up here. We've got this Mount Etna on the left there, and Mount Teide and the Canary Islands on the right. And I think, Ryan, are you gonna take us through this first wine?
He's gonna actually jump in and take us through the first wine here. And just one quick point is that
Yeah.
I was realizing that we actually for the club, for those of you who have already read the write up, we actually focused on like four volcanoes for this club, even though we had three wines.
Right.
So we'll be going through three wines tonight, but so Etna, Teide, Mount Canocti from Lake County, and if you read the write up, Mount Mazama or Crater
Crater.
Lake, better known. So but we'll be going through the former three tonight in the form of wines. But T, if you want to kick us off?
Yeah, love to. So the first wine we have is from Sicily. It's from Antichi, the wine crown Antichi Vinai, and it is a wine made in the north of the island, north of Mount Etna in Randazzo, in the northeast, by the Gemi family, who've been farming organic on both on the slopes of Mount Etna. And on Mount Etna itself for over 5 generations. So this wine is 100% Nerello Mascalese, which is an indigenous variety to the island, and it is vinified, picked, and then vinified in concrete tanks, and then bottled. So it doesn't see any oak, and that kind of I think we talked about this before, but concrete tanks are becoming increasingly popular in the world of winemaking in the past, I would say, 15 to 20 years. Different from stainless steel. Stainless steel obviously doesn't allow any oxygen transfer, and oak allows oxygen transfer, but it oftentimes, depending on the toasting of the oak and how new the barrels are, imparts a kind of a rounder, oakier flavor. So concrete allows for oxygen exchange, which softens some of the tannins, but doesn't impart any of that oak tannins or oak characteristics to it. This is a wine that we really love from a producer that, as Etna is becoming more and more popular, the prices on Etna wines have really gone up. I mean, a lot of people consider higher end Etnas kind of almost like the Burgundy of Italy in terms of like how light they are, and floral, and but a little bit has a little bit more burly characteristics. But you know, this wine is something that I is still super affordable,
Yeah.
and still express the terroir of the area. So it's grown right on the slopes of Mount Etna, has volcanic soils with some sandy soils. mixed into it. They also grow figs and citrus in their vineyards. Sicilian oranges are super famous and can make really good liqueurs as well. So they do some of that as well on so yeah, let's try it.
This is such a pretty wine. Yeah.
And so as far as the like the typical, like I said, the Etna Rosso, this type of thing, like these are wines that are obviously getting more and more expensive. This wine is technically a Terre Siciliane, so it's like as far as the appellation, it's down a peg from Etna Rosso, but this is an Etna Rosso producer, and so this is from vineyards that are outside that Etna appellation, but like you said, still featuring these Etna terroirs, these volcanic terroirs, because it's farther down the slope, so not technically in the
DLC, but in the Etna DLC, but it still shares a lot of the characteristics of it, of the DLC. I mean, it's very similar terroir, just slightly lower altitude.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, it's still on the slope, and
It's so bright and light, I mean, it's just, we made the parallel to Burgundy, and, it's kind of a stunt though. I think blinding this the last time I missed Nerello Mascalese. It was because if you had tannins in this, I'd be calling it Barolo, I'd be calling it Barbaresco. It has that complexity, that concentration. It's beautiful. It's really lovely.
I mean, and Nerello Mascalese is great, that I would say typically has more of that tannin. This style here with a little bit of that sort of softened element, like he's talking about from the concrete, I would say gives a little more of that lift, a little more of that perfume, a little more of that I wouldn't say light necessarily, but a little more like softness to it. Where it's not, Nerello Mascalese can be kind of burly and angry if if you make it in a more extracted way. And so I think there's definitely an approachable character to this wine.
And it's really bright as well, and the vines are between 20 to 70-year-old vines, so they do some age on it, so they're reaching deep into the soil to grab some of that kind of little hint of like phenolic bitterness out, and kind of like, I really love the blue fruits on it, and I think it's like a really fresh, bright wines. When we were tasting wines for this club, we actually tasted this wine, and then we tasted the Antichi Vinai Etna Rosso as well. Ryan and I tasted
the bigger sibling, if you will.
Bigger sibling, and I was like, me and Ryan were like, I like both of them, but I kind of like how fresh this is and how bright it is. And we were like debating on like what was like more typical, and then we decided to go with this just because I think we both liked it more. Actually, Angelino, who's one of the importers for this, he's like, I really like this wine too, and we tried it, and we thought it was like a really nice expression of Nerello Mascalese.
So guys, how common is it to find like a single variety like Nerello Mascalese? Isn't it usually blended with like Nerello Capuchos at
the usually, so the bigger brother, the Antichi Vinai Etna Rosso, is a blend of Nerello Mascalese and Nerello Capucho, which is the normal blend, and they're always done in oak. You hardly ever see it done in concrete. Sometimes it's not often.
And the interplay between the two, Mascalese again, it's gonna have a little bit more of that, more tannin, a little more grip to it, and the Capuccio lending a little bit more of the kind of perfumey elements. But you really get some of that kind of like floral, sort of kind of floral sweetness, if you will, on the nose to this wine. So it plays well by itself, I think, in this instance. So, so as far as Etna, who here has been to Etna? I mean, Dana's been to Etna.
Pietro just came back from.
But Pietro, you were just there recently, right?
Yeah, this summer.
In the summer, so were you on? Did you do like a kind of a circumventing the mountain tour of it, or were you more focused on one side?
It was an accelerated 2-day circumnavigation.
Wow.
It's about 4 winery stops. 5, actually. So yeah, really remarkable place.
So did you notice that there was like slope by slope? Because I think so, like the winery for for this wine is that he's on the north side. They have a lot of vineyards on the north side. This one also, I think, has grapes from the east side as well. Do you notice significant, like, let's say, like, in terms of obviously the geology, the soils, but how the wines express themselves depending on which side and which slopes they were coming from?
And which side of the island they're from.
Yeah,
right.
It's like
the weather actually, just driving around over the course, in the middle of summer, you're talking about 100 degrees in Taormina and windy and 72 degrees at 5,000 feet up on Etna.
Snow, maybe.
So the change can be remarkable, and the amount of not only is the mountain actively producing smoke on most days, but getting little bits of fog and clouds come through, and so just the environmental factors are pretty amazing. But then just driving through, you notice completely different rock formations, and the soil types are obviously very different depending on venting and with volcanology. Even where we are away 2 miles away from a much smaller volcano, when we were digging out tree roots to plant the vines, there would be rivers of strange rocks 20 feet wide that were buried 10 feet underground with nothing around them, clearly from the uplift and just the violence of what a volcano can do. So I don't feel like I have a full grasp of. We can make some guesses, like north is going to be a little higher in acidity, south might be have a little more richness and ripeness to it. But I think there's so many microclimates, and then there are so many older vineyards, because a lot of these vineyards were kind of lost and forgotten and then are being rehabilitated, which is a fantastic thing. And some of the vineyards I visited, they don't know what the hell is in them. Right. They're one guy was showing me Sangiovese vines. He didn't know where from. He was pretty sure they were Sangiovese and wanted me to look at them. Supposedly about 90% of the Nerello Cappuccio is actually Carignan, according to DNA tests that are being done. Yeah, so I mean, just outside of normal vine mysteries like that, there are so many. And this, the beautiful thing about Etna is it really is like 2 acres, 1 acre, 3 acres, all these micro blocks, all with different aspects, soils, slightly different environmental factors. It's an amazing patchwork that I think is probably really hard to make strong generalizations about, which is the beauty of it. It's really remarkable.
It's a really important point, especially we're looking at these 3 different regions through the club, and as we were doing research, we're talking about soil types, and you were saying even within a single vineyard, right? Different geological formations and Etna and the microclimates. I think a takeaway. I wonder. I think when we're talking about volcanic soils and the effect that it has on vines and grape growing, the stress on the vine, right? That seems to be uniform across all of these different regions, right? That irrespective, it's about stress on the vine and concentration within the clusters. Is that accurate to say when we're thinking about the effect that volcanic soils typically have? There's
I think, like an athlete, a certain amount of stress is necessary for good fundamental development. Of course, there can be too much stress. You have to have some sort of soil for roots to be able to function and to be able to hold enough water to get through the year and happily go dormant and start again next year. So yeah, I think a moderate level. And one interesting thing just on Etna also, just dry, rocky, and then massive humidity. This year up on Etna was not a good year to visit, actually, because they had the wettest spring in history that decimated Sicilian wine, particularly on Etna. So the amount of mildew and fungus in the vineyards was really depressing to see this year. But it does highlight the fact that the environment is real. And, we're on a new frontier with climate change and things like that. So I think these vines on volcanoes that are actually trained to leaner conditions have a higher probability of continuing to make great wine than mega California vineyards that are highly irrigated and things like that, just as a an interesting aside. So.
Yeah, as a point of comparison, that's fascinating and troubling.
And troubling, yes, multiple layers for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
So what do you guys get in the glass? T, Ryan, Dina? What do you?
Yeah. T, do you want
Yeah,
to give us a few tasting notes here, T?
Yeah, I really love, it comes up with this like the initial nose. I get like kind of this like floral yet like kind of musty, like bright kind of like little hint of violets, Yeah, and on palate I get, some cranberry notes to it. A lot of maybe Thanksgiving is still in my mind, but
Say, I wish I had a bottle of this for turkey time. We're out of leftovers, unfortunately.
It's a tough day.
But I get some cranberries, blueberries, like there's like a hint of like wild blue fruits to it. Like, yeah.
So this
Yeah.
worked out really well for me because if you leave anything out here in Hawaii for any length of time, it accumulates just a layer of like a film of black volcanic dust from the air here. So it's kind of like in the glass, you're washing it out. So I think there's like kind of a natural volcanism to anything.
Yeah, you're getting a live stream actually of the
Yeah.
fifth series of volcanoes. In the fifth
All
region.
your wines.
I
Your
hadn't
wines
had these
are-
glasses out for a while, and I had to wash them all out.
Just decant everything openly. You'll have a volcanic wine every time.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a nice like kind of spice characteristic on the front and back palate, I guess.
And that's I think that might be like something that I always associate with volcanic wines is like, and again, I use the word spice or like peppery or these types of things a lot. I mean, actually, it's kind of a good sort of segue into the next wine here, because that's like one of my top tasting notes is always kind of like white pepper, black pepper sort of tone to it. I mean, not every wine grown in volcanic soils has this, but it is something that let's say if I'm blind tasting, that I'm always kind of struck by how often I find it when the wine turns out to be from a volcanic soil. But I think that's something that we're you always kind of are looking for, is like, okay, volcanic soil, like what am I going to get from that reliably? And I think that's something that for someone maybe purchasing wine or something like that, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes because of obviously winemaking decisions, things like that can influence things. But I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence that points towards like we're talking about these acidity, the wines are stressed, concentration of flavors, a little bit more intensity there.
Yeah, and I mean also the first two wines, they're both islands.
Exactly.
So they they have that diurnal shift and that like oceanic influence,
like wind,
winds and stuff.
Well, it's a good transition onto wine number two. We'll move right along to there. So wine number two is the 2019 Suertes de Marques de El Lance Siete Fuentes. It's from Valle de la Orotava, Tenerife, which is the Canary Islands of Spain. So the Canary Islands are located off of the western coast of Morocco and the Western Sahara. This is from Tenerife. Probably maybe I think it's the largest amount of vineyards on the islands, but there's 7 Canary Islands. 6 out of the 7 produce wine. And so the Volcano Teide is the most prominent feature on Tenerife. This wine is grown on the northern slopes of Teide, close to the ocean, at about 500 to 600 meters elevation above sea level. It's a blend of Listan Negro, also known as the Mission Grape, Baboso Negro, Malvasia, Tintilla, and Vijariego Negro. So this is a wine that is done all native yeasts. This is actually a pretty unique grape growing project in general. The winemaker, Jonathan, he has a vineyard planted to a number of these different native varieties, or I should say at least like, in indigenous varieties. I don't know if they're entirely native there, but indigenous varieties planted in these volcanic soils here as well, that are on the lower slopes of Mount Teide. And the really unique thing about this wine, again, made in a very kind of hands-off sort of style, very like low SO2 kind of, this is really sort of his winemaking style. This is done in tank, so no oak on this wine. And he's he's a grape grower that has been growing with this particular unique style of grape trellis. I guess it's kind of a trellising method.
Yeah.
Called Cordon Trenzado. Jeff, if you want to pop to the next slide there.
Crazy.
I can show you guys some images actually here. So actually, this is actually the view from the vineyards here. That is the Pacific Ocean there. So a lot of wind influence there on the slopes here. And then if you want to pop to the next one, actually. So this is Cordon Trenzado, where they actually braid the vines together in long braided kind of cordons that are basically running about 15 to 20 feet long, as I understand it, if not more in some cases, 10 to 200-year-old vines. So he interplants young vines with the older vines. They're all ungrafted vines. There's no phylloxera. There's no grape louse problem for the vines there. So sandy volcanic soils, and yeah, this wine is really, again, it's a uniquely Canarian wine. With none of these grapes are really well known outside of the Canary Islands, I would say. And really the style is I think shows this kind of volcanic character a lot in the glass, again, with that kind of like sort of peppery, spicy note, and also this concentration. If you want to go to the next one there, Jeff. That's Jonathan with his vines. You can see how thick they are. And then the last one there, Jeff, would be the last one. So you can see how these vines run up the hill there, and they're essentially, they look like these large braids, corded braids of vines. So extremely unique as far as, in my experience, grape growing technique. Yeah. And of course, you have these roots going down deep into these volcanic soils. Really kind of, again, like we talk about stress, like these are very poor soils. He actually kind of makes two big distinctions between his wines that have essentially more sand or more clay in the predominant volcanic terroirs, and this one has a little bit more clay in the soil, so you got maybe a little bit more like weight and texture on the palate. But again, this is something that is a microclimate. They get a lot of wind on the north slope of Tenerife, so it's very, very breezy. This is something that definitely, I would say, affects the concentration and the development of the skins of the grapes as well. But yeah, overall, I thought this is just a really fascinating wine. Obviously, for the grape growing, I think is fascinating, but in the glass, I got a lot of like white pepper, black pepper, a lot of those kind of like crushed cherries, pomegranate little notes there. Definitely kind of some red currant, and just kind of like a floral, like mildly earthy, spicy. I mean, it's, again, spicy is like one of those like kind of catch-all terms, but one of those kind of types of wines that has a lot of that kind of spice box character to it. So,
yeah. For those who don't know, maybe you could just speak for a moment about what the mission grape is, like why that's significant, kind of in we're exploring.
Absolutely, yeah. So the
history of wine. So.
Yeah, Listan Negro is also known as the mission grape. This is a grape that was brought regularly to, let's say, the New World, for plantations at the Catholic missions. So it's something that I think also they didn't have DNA profiling and phenotyping, genotyping, all that sort of stuff back then. So I think there's a lot of things that were classified as the mission grape that probably would not be, it's not going to be a monoculture. If you go back, if you took a time capsule back 150 years, but this is now a cultivar that you see in isolated plantings in places like as Listan Negro in the Canary Islands. You see some here in California. You see it planted as mission, or sorry, not as mission, as Pais in Chile as well. So it's a unique grape that really, I would say, yes, there is a grape that is this expression, this cultivar, but it's also something that was probably, I mean, I think, Zinfandel was probably one, and all of its cultivar variants was probably one of the grapes that was a mission grape for a time as well. So there's a lot of different grapes that I would say, especially in the early 20th century, late 19th century, would have counted as a mission grape. But now we have this Listan Negro is kind of been traced back as like this, or one of the original mission grapes.
Right. And as you imagine, missionaries, when they're taking vine cuttings over. They're gonna probably be taking for the long voyage, they're gonna take the strongest vines, the best, the most easiest to produce,
Right.
most highest yield, like easy,
Hardy.
hardy
Yeah.
vines that they can. And and this is, and as you imagine, you in the Canary Islands, you kind of have almost like a Galapagos effect where you bring these vines in, you grow them, and they're just interbreeding with each other without a lot of outside influence for quite a while. And they're evolving, adapting to the climate. And
I even think within the vine itself. I mean, I'm just so fascinated by this image, right? And you think about, berries that are coming from, the lower, earlier sections of the vine.
Yeah.
I mean, what, 200 years? Is that what
Yeah,
you're
so
saying?
it's they vary from about, let's say 10 at the youngest, but then up to 200 years, where in these long braids will come back to the quote mother vine, kind of, which it has like a single stump, like large stump.
Yeah, I mean,
Amazing.
It's amazing. And seeing this and seeing where the vineyards are located, it reminds me of another Canary island, Lanzarote, where because of how strong the winds are, people are literally digging pits and growing vines in there. And so the vines are like in these like kind of
Shielded pits,
shielded like volcanic ash pits, which then protect them from the wind. And I wonder whether this technique is a way to protect young vines by putting them closer to older vines to protect them from the wind. Because if you imagine you're growing like a young vine and it's just getting ripped by like the wind, it's gonna it's not gonna be able to last.
Surface roots.
When I first saw these photos, I am not a grape grower. I immediately thought, I was like, what would someone who grows grapes think about this, who doesn't grow grapes in this way? Pietro, I'm curious, looking at these types of vines, your first thought as someone who grows grapes, your mind maybe goes to like, wow, that looks like a lot of work. Where does what are you thinking when you see these?
It's actually a really interesting topic. Grapevine pruning and growing is going through a little bit of a revolution over these last couple of years as far as our understanding of what vine wants to do and resilience and things like that in the face of climate change. And the newer philosophies are seeing that basically vines want to keep growing, and the more living wood you have, the stronger the vine is, because reciprocally, the stronger the roots are, because they're not a disconnected thing. The more wood you have on top, the more energy flows back into the roots to sustain growth. And a friend of mine just got a newly translated pruning book, bought it for me. I read it just a couple of days ago, talking about these exact things, where these vines that live 200 years, they're not the ones that we're whacking back to stumps every year trying to control them in California vineyards. They grow in these wild fashions like this. And there's increasing evidence that, vines actually want to grow and keep growing. So now some of the pruning theory is keep building larger vines over time, trying to simulate this sort of natural progression to make the vines stronger. They can hold more water, they can withstand more heat, they can go dormant longer. And this sort of endorses that whole paradigm shift that we're seeing right now.
I imagine like the conflict there will be with yields, where if you're growing a commercial vineyard and you're trying to make a grocery store wine, that
are you growing grapes or are you growing wood?
Exactly. You have to make a choice there. And if you're trying to mitigate the, like you said, the effects of climate change or whatever it is that you're working with in your particular site, growing wood is not always a profitable endeavor. If you're not getting enough yield out of it. So unfortunately, I don't know exactly what tonnage per acre or hectare that Jonathan is getting out of these vines. I imagine it's not super high based on just the soils, his farming styles. But I start talking about resiliency though, in terms of like how can we continue to make wine. I think it's something that I think savvy winemakers with an eye to the future will, like you said, like these new thoughts about grape growing are going to be essential to be able for the future of, shall we say, like, I don't know, good quality
Higher
winemaking.
end wine.
Higher end wines, yeah, exactly. Whereas, if someone's just looking to make a quick buck, then yeah, they're gonna prune, they're gonna irrigate, they're gonna fertilize, they're gonna, do everything that they need to do to get it to a commercially viable, turnaround time. They're thinking in terms of, fiscal quarters as opposed to growing cycles. Yeah.
No, this is amazing.
I can't help thinking, like, just visually it makes me imagine the lava flowing down the mountainside. I mean,
it's really true.
Sinuous, like, it's really interesting. I've never seen anything quite like that.
Yeah, extremely unique stuff. There is a vine, or I guess I should say a wine made from vines like this in Eastern Europe. I remember our friend Eric Danch, who imports a lot of our favorite Eastern European wines, told us about this wine in Slovenia. It's called Kraljevina, and it's essentially, it looks like this, and it's wrapped around a castle, and it's essentially one single massive vine that surrounds this abandoned medieval castle that they harvest off of and make wine off of. So
it's been there for like centuries,
and the wine and the vine is like I think he said it's like 250 years old.
Yeah,
so it's incredible.
Yeah.
I think we underestimate the resiliency of vines, and also the quality of wine that it can make. I mean, there's wineries in Napa, I know that they rip out their vines every 30 years,
25, 30
years. They're ripping it out and replanting for
because it's yields
to stay commercially viable. Yeah. Well,
speaking of Napa, California, Napa,
transitional.
Yeah.
Well, not Napa, but
Lake County,
north of Napa.
Yeah,
that's right.
Where I'd rather be. So let's move on to wine number 3 here. I'll introduce the wine and then hand it over to, a little bit to Pietro.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan.
No, not at all.
Oh, actually, Dan, did you want?
No, not at all. I was going to say it's such a pleasure to be working. Yeah, to have Pietro with us, and Jeff was saying it at the top of the call. Long time collaborator and friend of Angel.
Co-worker.
I'm excited, and both of the prior 2 wines are wines that I love personally. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So maybe Pietro, maybe we can start with you just talking about like Lake County, like just the area. We
have a slide that you sent over for us if you want us to show that. Kind of this. Which one do you want? This one?
Yeah, let's just start with the map there.
Okay.
So on the left is just a quick little map of our vineyard. We have 13 different grapes planted on 10 acres. So we're talking about a very small scale venture here. 9 of those are Italian cultivars, which I didn't plan on, just happened to fall in love with Italian wine. To this day, 15 years later, it's still, when it's good for me, just Italian wines are the most emotionally engaging, as much as I love all of my French stuff and Rieslings as well. But stepping back just a second, Lake County is, as far as the geography and geology to some extent, it's almost like a northern extension of Napa Valley. If you've ever been in Napa Valley and looked north towards Calistoga, you have 2 mountain ranges. The one on the left is the Mayacamas mountain range, and then the one on the right is the Vaca range. The Vaca range is a little bit strange. It sort of disappears and dissipates, and then it's actually consumed by the Mayacamas range, which splits and runs all around Clear Lake, that big lake in the middle, and then rolls out to the Central Valley, which is much flatter, hot I-5 sort of California. Lake County is considered a pretty young area geologically. The Mount Canocti volcano last exploded maybe 11,000 years ago. It's actually the 33rd most dangerous volcano in the US, and is classified as high risk. Exactly what that means, nobody quite knows. It doesn't show any signs of exploding anytime soon. I don't think I've ever seen any, it's not like Etna where it's just puffing away all the time and you worry if it's not quietly smoking through the night. But just keeping in mind, as far as the volcanic theme, you have two different plates running into each other, the Pacific plate and then I think the North American plate. And then underneath that is a massive magma chamber, which is underneath part of Napa Valley. You can see a little corner there where it touches Sonoma County and Mendocino. And then you see the kind of curvy line for the Lake County line. Underneath all of that corner is the largest geothermal plant in the world. And that's because of that active, essentially, as a kid, I always like to imagine big waves of, lava moving around underneath the earth. But that almost literally is what it is. So you're generating electricity for, I think, 900,000 people constantly from the volcanic energy right in that little 3-county zone. So still very much alive. They've been doing lots of really interesting, it's almost like it's not seismological, but they're using sound waves to try to figure out exactly what's underneath the crust because there are different densities, and then they're sort of reverse mapping all of that. So yeah, it's really cool. I went to a little seminar, and I think if you're a volcanology student, you go to Lake County. It's one of like 10 destinations that you have to go spend time at. So, and that ends up affecting the soils that we have up there. Lake County is a higher elevation county. Most of the grape growing is above 1,000 feet. We're at 1,500 feet, but right now vineyards are planted up to 3,400 feet. A lot of different soil types, a lot of that very red, iron-rich sort of soil that's considered very young. So instead of being really old, weathered rock, like you might find in the Sierra foothills where you have all of this amazing decomposed granite, instead it's a lot of obsidian and very fine volcanic sand. But similar to Etna, soil type can change just 200 feet away from, something else that's completely different. Warmer climate area, so things that can take some heat do well. So Rhone varietals, Morved can be fantastic up there, Grenache. It's a little too warm for Pinot, but things, as far as Italian grapes go, from central to southern, do really, really well up there. I have a hard time thinking of a grape from Tuscany downward that I would not plant in Lake County. And getting some Sicilian varietals in there would be the next thing.
We support that.
So
Yeah.
for the Aglianico, which is like smack in the middle of the vineyard, kind of, right? Like that's plot G on the map there.
Plot G, yeah.
Yeah.
Not necessarily out of planted that in 2003. So still sort of figuring out what we were doing. I found there's sort of a cold air drainage that runs through the property and a little bit of lower elevation stuff. So later on, I was able to plant things like Nebbiolo there, trying to keep it a little cooler and happier. But the Aglianico is, we put it where we put it.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably orient it a little bit differently if I had to do it again. But Aglianico is an amazingly resilient grape. It does a fantastic job of protecting itself from heat. It's fine with cold. It really conserves water amazingly well. It, as a truly ancient grape, it almost has that sense of just self-preservation that a lot of other grapevines don't have. So when it's 100 degrees in Lake County, it just kind of quietly takes a nap and protects itself in the middle of the day. It uses less water than anything else we have in the vineyard. There have been several years now where we haven't ever irrigated it, which is pretty amazing for a grape that you're often not picking until November 1st. And Lake County can be quite warm. So it really is a survivor vine, but it is also very sensitive. It's sensitive to mildew. It doesn't like to graft. We had a lot of broken grafts when we planted the vines. And it's really susceptible to pruning wounds, which kind of dovetails with the earlier grapevine growing things. It's the one I'm constantly thinking about how I would like to restructure the vines and regrow it for a happier, more expressive something that's more suited to its nature rather than just 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, vine, 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 that sort of standardization that we have in California.
Wow. Yeah. It's I mean, when you mention like it protects itself when it gets really hot, does that just mean like what do you mean by that? Like where like when if they quote unquote like shut down, or like it doesn't use much water, like what's going on in that
yeah, grapevines are interesting. They need a good amount of heat to ripen, but too much is not good for the fruit. So a lot of vines, they basically regulate themselves through pores called stomata. And because they're exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen, and they have a circulatory system similar to how we have, when it gets too hot, they protect themselves by basically taking a nap and closing all those pores, and they stop breathing. That way they conserve all of the moisture. And vines that do well in more arid climates, certainly Canary Islands, certainly Etna, a lot of them have more efficient mechanisms for dealing with that and more rugged conditions. Some grapes, you could plant Grenache next to Cabernet Franc in the same vineyard, and the Grenache will look fantastic in 105-degree weather, whereas the Cabernet Franc is just suffering and wilting, and the leaves are visibly, you can tell when a vine is under a lot of stress. And these different cultivars, they respond to those things differently. But some of the vines, like the Rhone ones, that have to deal with more heat. Similarly, southern Italy can be quite a challenging place as well. And Aglianico seems to be particularly adapted to somehow just metering itself out over a really long growing season, protecting its resources and being really careful with water and growth. Don't know why. I mean, it's in the DNA.
It's something that just
over
adapts
time.
over time. Yeah. So going back to the wine itself, this is a non-vintage wine.
Yes, this one is non-vintage. I've been doing that a little bit more when we've had to deal with challenging years. This is a blend of 2017 and 2018 vintages. 2017 was quite cold and rainy. I think we got over 50 inches of rain that year, which is crazy because we've had lots of years where 8 has become the new normal. So the 2017 vintage was a little leaner, a little lighter, kind of lacking a little bit of mid-palate to it. And then 2018 was back to the normal California drought sort of situation. But then during the late summer of 2018, we had the Mendocino complex fire, which ended up being, I think it burned for 63 days in Lake County. And it was our first time we had to deal with a fire vintage. 1 year before it got really bad in some other areas. And a lot of us, for me, the first time dealing with it, I was freaked out about the possibility of smoke taint, and it's still an evolving science. We don't understand all the chemistry behind it. And more interestingly, different grapes react differently to it, because grapes, they breathe through the skin of the berries. So they actually bring these smoke compounds into them. Unlike a tomato or an apple that has a completely sealed barrier. Grapes, the entire grapevine is breathing continually. So I did lots of labbing and testing and watched it really carefully. And numbers were actually, a couple of the Italian grapes turn out to be pretty resistant to smoke taint. Numbers are just all over the board, but Barbera and Aglianico were a couple of the lowest. But just in case, I had these two different components, and the 2018 was very, super heavy plum, very jammy, hot vintage, so very ripe and fleshy. Then I had this leaner 2017 where I really enjoyed it, but I wasn't sure that if every consumer would enjoy it for the same interesting notes as myself. So just decided to feel it out and do a non-vintage blend with the two. And I think it actually, some of the non-vintage experiments with these longer ripening grapes have been pretty successful. And over time, so this spent spontaneous fermentation, about 20 days long for both vintages. And then the average time in barrel, I think, was 32 months. Aglianico can spend a long time in barrels. It's a very slow maturing grape. Has a lot of tannin, a good amount of acidity, but a lot of phenolic stuffing, and it likes to interact with air slowly over time. So extended aging is pretty normal for a lot of Aglianicos, unless you're in a place where you're trying to, make a lighter, quicker, get it to market sort of thing. But still, no, it certainly isn't over the hill by any stretch or anything like that, even with all of that barrel aging.
Not at all.
Not at all. And
Yeah.
I would say like I think I think the brilliant move from you, Pietro, is like blending the 2 years, because if you have Aglianico from Italy, they are when you have young Aglianico, they are so tannic, so burly.
It's sort of like
and
an automatic
acidic.
10-year wait if you're buying Toronto.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost that's why when you have, say, Aglianico from Campania, they often blend it with something else.
Yeah.
Because they need to soften it. Because otherwise, is a pure Aglianico is not drinkable within 5 years.
Yeah.
And
I think the non-vintage aspect of this, I think, is like you're really kind of like pioneering something that I think we're going to see more and more of. Honestly, I mean, this is like part of the conversation of about climate change, about where winemaking is going, where things like smoke years, things like that. There's no reason to not make a wine that one that you enjoy yourself, but two that you as a winemaker, as a business owner, feel represents your best product. I mean, this wine is delicious. Like, it is such a good wine, and I think there's probably just, I would say, a blind spot in a lot of consumers' minds about what non-vintage means, and about what,
especially on a red wine.
Especially on a red wine, with it needs to be of a certain vintage, it needs to be of this, like, there's kind of this more like classical sort of like, oh, like, is it a good year or a bad year, or
something versus creating something.
Yeah, and I think increasingly we will see wines like this. So I think there's kind of this almost a trend setting with the wine like this that you've done, that really this is a amazing example of a wine showing probably better than the sum of its two parts, according to your interpretations of it, right? Where and it's not the first wine to ever be non-vintage. I mean, they've been doing it in Champagne for a long time. They use all kinds of reserve wines and stored wines from years past and all that sort of stuff. So it's not like this is like a brand new concept, but employing it in this way, I think, is going to be a measure, or a method, I should say, to allow winemakers to be able to mitigate when they have these challenges they face,
especially with climate change, as you mentioned, Pietro. Like, I think with climate change, then wines that will become that people expect a wine to taste a certain way then changes, and then what do you do? Do you just make it for that vintage? I remember 2015 Beaujolais, and it was like 14 or 15%, and we were like, what? Like, and people are like, what do we do with this?
In 2018,
be creative.
In 2018,
Yeah.
I had winemakers in Burgundy when I was in France telling me that their Gevrey Chambertin was coming in at 17% alcohol, natural alcohol, 17%. That's hotter than the hottest Zinfandels I've ever tasted from Russian Rivers and Sonoma, Paso Robles. And this is Pinot Noir coming in central France at 17% natural alcohol. And this is something that they're, of course, they are saying they can't water back or anything like that, but everyone's doing it. There's all this sort of stuff to try to keep it under like a certain number for marketing and sales purposes. But these are the realities, is that they're facing things that they haven't faced before. So
2019, you had California producers leaning into the fires and saying, hey, we're gonna now market this and say, we have something that's unique and interesting. It was a little fire sale, but at the same time, right? Yeah, it's getting creative and finding these solutions and approaches. And yeah, agreed, Pietro, on the cutting edge of it. We're just so happy. I was wondering, Pietro, you've as we've talked to you and you've explained, your production and your philosophy, I think people are getting a really clear sense of who you are and what you bring to winemaking. But we're looking at your label. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, the label, about Prima Materia, your philosophy of winemaking. I know we've touched on it a little bit today, but just how Prima Materia came into being.
Yeah, just a quick overview. As a kid, lived on a vineyard briefly, involved in agriculture. We also sold apples and prunes and things like that for about 6 years. But I remember just we had these 100-year-old shastless vines on the back of the property, which are, they're like tree trunks and these gnarled old. I remember just loving those vines so much as a kid and being fascinated by them, and somehow was sort of wrapped up in being 9 and planting gardens and just being pretty autonomous out in the country. That went away for a while, but later on I actually didn't realize that was going to move me towards becoming a chef for a little while. So working in kitchens full time, sort of coming back to that more tactile, organic kind of thing. And then I needed a break from that and reconnected with wine and vineyards. And it was like a light bulb went off for me. It wrapped up a lot of the older sort of the things you can't really articulate that you find so fascinating and interesting. And the family had this little property up in Lake County. So I got involved with that and then just started planting an acre a year. We were taking out our own walnut trees, letting it fallow for a year. I was out there with chainsaws for 6 weeks. Just really, dig a hole, plant a vine, dig a hole, plant a vine kind of thing. Very simple, but it also, just as part of the wine adventure, like being able to actually grow these vines and plant them and prune them and change how I manage canopies and irrigation, and then the winemaking, which I do myself as well. It's like a whole bunch of real-time data on this loop where you're constantly like you're seeing the actual fruits of your labors literally and comedically, but you're also just thinking about this bottle. A, I remember hand bottling it. B, I remember the day I blended it. I remember planting the vines. I remember trying to decide whether or not to rack the barrels or whether to leave all the dead yeast on the bottom for aging and all those moments, and then still sort of tracking it over time. Like it's this decade-long process, which is so different than a vineyard or than a kitchen where it's like every night new menu, like fast, hot, fire. Like wine is the total other side of the brain for me, where it's very slow and organic and like frustrating sometimes because of that. But you get something where this bottle is still evolving, and it still has a sort of narrative arc that's not complete through it. So I just find that endlessly cool. So Prima Materia has an alchemical theme, sort of bringing together the alchemy of transforming things into a higher state of being. The particular label image, so all the labels are different woodcuts or etchings from books, usually in the 16th, 17th to 18th century. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. This is an image that a Spanish philosopher put together that was updated a little bit. But it was the evolution of the sciences. I believe the ones up in the tree that you can't really read, but it's all the hard sciences that were evolving at the time, 14th century, 13th century, 15th century, dark ages. So things are a little bit weird. And then all the metaphysical things are under the earth, and the tree is uniting the two things into the tree of knowledge that we're kind of, and I love yin and yang type things like that, because it really wraps up the wine adventure for me.
Yeah, and it has
just
four elements in it,
how do we
too.
make like cool Italian wines in California that are A, authentic to the vineyard, B, authentic to California, because we may be paying a lot to live here, but it's also a pretty cool place, much as I have problems with it. But also faithful to the Italian grapes themselves. So you're trying to run sort of 3 threads through something and be as honest as you can with all of them, which is a really cool puzzle in itself. So
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and
Pietro,
also
can you tell us? Sorry, I interrupt. I can't hear. Do you guys go?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead,
I
Jeff.
was just gonna. Can you tell us some of the other grapes you're growing there? I mean, you mentioned Sangiovese, but we've also had some whites and rosés and things like that.
Yeah, let's see. Barbera, Sangiovese, Sagrantino, which is a really cool Central Italian European grape from Umbria. Negro Amaro, which is from the heel of the boot, deep near the ocean in Puglia. Dolcetto, which is a northern grape. We also have Nebbiolo, which makes Barolo and Barbaresco. That's another one that I've become pretty committed to doing non-vintage. We aren't quite in the right location for Nebbiolo, but if you're a Nebbiolo drinker, it usually inspires a lot of passion in you to at least try with that grape. And that is one that I'll probably be committed to non-vintage wines with it forever, just so we can have a cool rainy vintage along with a warmer, riper, rounder vintage, and try to keep some of the innate nature of the grape going in there. Yeah, let's see, 5 different types of Sangiovese, a couple other things like Grenache, and a little bit of Petit Syrah, a little bit of Cab Franc.
What was the skin? Didn't we have like a skin contact white a couple years ago? We did the
The Sangiovese Bianco.
Oh
yeah, we've
Yeah.
been basically making a white wine out of
yeah, that was
Sangiovese
delicious.
as well.
That was really good. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's always kind of surprising. It reminds me of Sangiovese is a whole other Zoom topic. But you can do so much with it, and it almost has a Pinot-ish finesse. If you've ever had a Blanc de Noir, or there are some people making white wines out of Pinot, and they have this similar, like, really cool medium body, beautiful, round, fleshy, but tautness to them. Yeah, and that was another way to deal with like a really hot vintage. And I was like, I don't know. I think maybe I should pick some of this now and experiment with it. And then it's like, oh, this actually turned out really nicely. Maybe we'll do this every year, sort of moment.
Yeah, the wine's great. Yeah.
Jeff, would you go just to the next image really quick? I think this is the Nebbiolo vineyard, right? Right, Pietro?
Yeah, or
Yeah,
Sangiovese,
okay.
right next to it. Yes.
Oh, Sangiovese next to. Okay, yeah, got it. So you can kind of see like the soil a little bit. And this is like from my pictures when we were T and I actually helped out on the 2020 vintage up there. But so very very fond memories of working.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yes.
And that's Mount Canocti right there, right?
That is Mount Canocti.
So that's Mount Canocti. So that is a 3-dimensional volcano. Of course, it looks kind of flat from here. But yeah, I think about 4,500 feet is the tallest of the 3 little peaks, and it was indeed a complete mountain at one point.
Pietro, there's a fantastic story, just like on a quick segue of Wapo. I'm sorry. Well, there's Mishwell Wapo, but also Pomo in the area. But of essentially these stories of folks at low lake levels actually entering into what's thought to be this giant open magma chamber.
There are lots of legends of caves
and underground lakes, and I mean it's really something. I wonder, have you, over the course of your working the land, come across any any archaeology? And you're absolved, by the way. We won't shut you down, don't worry. We're not going to come
Yeah, not in my particular spot. There's certainly lots of obsidian and shards that you kind of wonder if they've been hammered out or not, or if it's just the neighbor's tractor driving around breaking things up. But other people have discovered lots of things in their vineyards, and have heard other, I'd be curious to hear some of the stories from the area.
Yeah,
for sure.
We'll shut them down, right, Dana? Yeah.
You guys can shut them down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what you were like the underground like lakes and caverns. Like I think we had it in the write up was what you were referring to, the Dana, like about these explorers, these like Native American explorers that went in and they reportedly found like this.
It's a fascinating story.
Chamber inside Mount Canocti. So
there are a couple elements of this. Yeah, no, thanks. It's pretty interesting that. So what they recorded, and this was I think in the 1860s, 1870s, was the story of going in, finding this, at a low lake level, an entrance into the center of the mountain, and this open magma chamber with an underground lake with blind fish in it. They found fish with no eyes, which we know evolve elsewhere in environments like this. And that's kind of interestingly corroborated by like firsthand accounts of people all the way up, up until the 1950s, 1960s, who would go to the top of Mount Konocti when there was a cave. It's since collapsed, but the story goes that you used to be able to go into this cave and there was a hole in a chamber and it would just drop and people would drop rocks, and they would
Oh, wow.
hear them hit the ground. And then they would drop things like colored sticks. And the story goes that those things would show up actually in Clear Lake, and they'd be found later on. So if that's true, and there are a lot of people that think it might be, that's a 2,000-foot drop from the top of Mount Konocti to the bottom. It would be one of the largest internal caves anywhere, really. So there's a lot of discussion. There was a group of amateur archaeologists and geologists that were actually excavating on the top of the mountain up until about 1994, and then local landowners ended up worrying about the insurance repercussions. There's actually a fascinating documentary from 1994 on Google. I highly recommend you Google it and check it out.
I didn't know that.
30 minutes long. And it's all like camcorder stuff. And you can see why they shut them down, because these guys are like burrowing into the mountain. And it's wonderful.
So that's something you would do, Dana.
No, yeah, it's very much, like
Did you make this?
No, I had nothing to do with it. But it is a fascinating series of stories. And we've of course went into the mythology and in depth of other places like Crater Lake and some of the parallels that we see, across the world when it comes to volcanoes and these shared human experiences, both in terms of volcanoes, but what it means to live next to a volcano, what it means to grow food next to a volcano, and in our case, what it means to grow wine. So, yeah.
And for me, I mean, what's really, we don't get to talk a lot about California wines in our club, but so this is a great opportunity for us. But just think, Pietro growing Italian varieties. I mean, a lot of it harkens back to all the Italian immigrants who brought vine cuttings to California. I mean, most of California before Prohibition was a lot of Italian varieties. They would, it was only, and then, of course, a lot of vines were ripped out. Winemaking stopped or went underground during Prohibition.
Even during Prohibition, they were making Sacramento
wines, exactly,
from
the mission grades.
Holy wine.
And so it's really harkens back to California history, and the origins of winemaking in California with both mission grapes and Italian varieties.
Bringing
and
it full
Italian immigrants. Yep.
Carrying
So
on
like
tradition on
Sicily, so you got Sicily, Canary Islands, and then California. So it's all connected, which is what is a really awesome through line in this club.
We have such a fantastic opportunity having Pietro here, being able to taste in the glass, the fruits of his labors. I wonder, should we maybe open it up to questions for Pietro specifically?
Yeah.
Since we have this.
Yeah.
So if folks have questions, you can either put them in the chat, or you can, if at this point, I think, since we're kind of towards the end of our time here, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, if you have a question
I have a question.
Oh, Pietro's got a question.
What is the fourth wine?
The fourth wine. There's three wines.
I thought you said there was a Shasta.
4 volcanoes.
Oh, sorry, there's 4 volcanoes.
4 volcanoes.
The fourth volcano is actually is Mount Mazama, which became Crater Lake.
Okay.
And so in the write-up, we kind of profile that based on this amazing myth. It's a really cool myth that it resulted in according to legend, in the creation of Crater Lake. So as far as the wines, it was Etna, Teide, Konocti, but in the write-up we also profiled Crater Lake as for its volcanic myth as well. And there are wines from up in the Crater Lake Shasta area in the Umpqua Valley, because it was this is kind of it's an Umpqua Klamath tribe myth, if I'm correct, Dana. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But so there are wines from up there, but we were so excited to be able to feature your wine, Pietro, as well, and to profile Konocti as well with the club. So it's one of those things. We're always there's always more content and more wines than we can fit into our club
Yeah.
So someday we'll expand out to more and more.
Well, and you know, yeah, and feel free obviously to write your questions in the chat or unmute yourself. But to quick story, you know, when Pietro was talking about how he got passionate about, you know, making wines and like just literally growing it from seeds to grapes to winemaking. He got Ryan and I passionate about it. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I
You
remember
guys helped a
Pietro
lot.
picking me up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, and driving 2 hours to Kelseyville in Lake County
I did,
like, yeah.
I did 1 day of pruning and noted it was 1 day.
Yeah,
Because I
yeah.
didn't come back, and that was nothing on Pietro. It's a lot of
Yeah, I mean, it
It's
was
a lot of
amazing. So all three,
I did prune. Yeah.
yeah, so all three of us have been to the vineyard and have worked on it. So you
Yeah.
know, it's
a special place, and
it's a
we're
really
happy
special
to
place.
we're happy to have you as, you know, as our first California winemaker, Pietro.
Oh,
So.
first winemaker first California winemaker, first ever winemaker, you know, on the club member tasting, and you know, really happy to showcase your wines.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm happy that you've been there too. I mean, you're part of the story now. I mean, that's the amazing thing about a vineyard is it's.
Yeah, I mean, I hope the work that that T and Dana and I did, you know, you're not you're not ruining the day. You had us up there so you can help, you know, do shoot thinning or you know.
Yeah.
On
the flip side, I mean, I think all of us working in the vineyard in 2020 with COVID going on probably saved us in some way as well. So it was great to have you guys up there.
They did have to. They had to make a non-vintage wine after you guys worked on it.
Yeah, true.
Well, so I guess if there's no questions, one quick question is, Pietro, for this Aglianico, what do you get in the glass when you taste this wine?
Let's talk about this.
What are some of your tasting notes?
Yeah, let's talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a wine that definitely changes while it's open. It can be a little wound up when you first open it, so definitely give it some air and some time. I like it hits a couple of things for me. One is that sort of old Bordeaux finish with, you know, I always think of black rocks and just the nice sort of like dark minerality tone to it. I'm a texture guy, so I like the Nebbiolo has a lot of tannin. It's never going to be smooth like super fancy Cabernet Sauvignon, but it also is a noble tannin. So it rounds off ever so slightly, but still has some of that like granitic angularity to it. But I find it to be in a really wonderful, wonderful framing sort of way. Get that balance between red fruit and black fruit, which I really like. And there's probably some plum in there too. But I usually get a couple spice notes. A friend of mine swears by fenugreek, but I'm more on the you know, I get the barrels it was aged in were completely neutral. Some of them are at least 20 years old, so you're not getting any barrel influence. But definitely sometimes I get bits of dill, bits of herbaceous sort of just floating above the darker fruit tones. I'm blanking on not mint, but sort of like a touch of green lift to it that I sometimes find in Washington wines as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fennel. Fennel is usually a big marker.
Yeah, like a sweet fennel. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know why that wasn't coming out, but
I see a hand up from looks like D David's iPad. So if
you guys hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So Pietro, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm in Taos now. So learning to make wine and doing this, what is one of your most memorable experiences of food and wine on that journey?
Oh, that's a good one.
It could be food, wine, hiking, whatever.
Well, I remember the first pairing that really hit me, which was just a simple risotto thing, but it was one of the first Barolos that I had ever had.
Yep.
And it just, both from the culinary perspective, like how do you make a perfect canvas for something to present itself on? Like the Barolo, or the rice itself is fantastic, and the texture, and it was seasoned perfectly and cooked just, in that al dente way. It was creamy, just the proper moment for everything, but sculpted in such a way that the wine just exploded off of the plate for me. That was sort of an early aha moment, like, holy cow.
And were you in Italy or?
No, I was in Washington, oddly enough. Yeah, it was one of my first vintages. Trying to sell grapes, that we'd made into wine from this property. It must have been something like 2010. And a guy up there that owned the wine shop that's closed now took me out to dinner and said, I think we should, let's order a couple fancy bottles. Like, if you're paying for it, that would be fantastic. Went to this Italian restaurant that he really liked, and it was just, I was still learning. I didn't have sommelier certification. I didn't, even though I worked in some Michelin-starred restaurants, I was very much in the back with my head down and a knife in my hand most of the days. So it wasn't like I knew a lot about wine in 2005 at all. I had a good palate just from the food, but not for wine per se. And this was just one of the moments that really opened up my eyes. Like the first time I had a really good Sangiovese. So I'd had so many bad ones, and then you have a good one. And it's like, a 10-dimensional folding of your brain with all of these things going on. You can feel the neurons all like flashing. Yeah, things like that. They're so tactile. They really speak to me.
Yeah.
And then, Pietro, were you in Vancouver? Is that where you were in Washington? Or where I can't remember exactly. I knew you were in Portland area for a while, but
Yeah, I lived in Portland for about 20 years.
because some of my family's tuning in from Spokane, so I was kind of curious.
Oh, yeah.
They might want to
Nice.
know where you were up there. So
Yeah, I mean, Oregon has its wine scene, and then Washington is sort of its own beast that's fairly young and developing as well, but lots of really cool soils and climates up there as well.
Well, I had a quick question. Which region that you have visited taught you the most about growing your own grapes when you came back home?
Super good.
Oh, I haven't visited that many places. Like, certainly I stop in all the vineyards in Napa and look at how they prune.
Sure.
This Etna trip or Sicily trip, I should say. We spent 5 weeks driving around Sicily. Got to see a lot of different vine management. But talking to people, so there were moments when I really did not like the wine that they were pouring. But the depth of belief that these people have in their vineyard and in their wine to some extent, but often it's just the belief in the vineyard that is so amazing and compelling. I mean, a couple of the wines I had were just frankly terrible. And like when they'd turn around and dump it, as quickly as it could. But it's like sort of the beauty of the vineyard is, I guess for me, like right now I'm thinking about like, what would the perfect world be? The perfect world for me would be like 60% in the vineyard, 40% making the wine. Like that, just the vineyard really is the building block.
Right.
So, and even now, like I'm going to take another pruning class pretty soon. Some guys that are visiting from Italy in just 2 weeks. It gets me, like that picture from the Canary Islands gets me thinking about like what would the proper expression for each varietal be, because they all grow differently, they all react differently. It's just a really interesting puzzle. And then thinking about like what would that wine be like 10 years from now. So that's just super engaging.
So Pietro, I have a question regarding, because having a chef and a winemaker, what would you pair with the Aglianico? like
Yeah.
holidays are coming up and all that.
You can certainly take the steak and potatoes route, like the big protein, I think is good. I find it really interesting with grilled things, and charred vegetables in particular, maybe even more so than a protein. Just I find that the sugars and the caramelization, things like that, really you get interesting things out of the wine when you get those two. And I like tannin, so I don't like people that collect Cabernet Sauvignon. They're constantly talking about like 20 years aging and decanting and trying to make the tannin as soft as possible. And that's just not a thing for me. Like that's part of a wine's vibrance, is that I still want it to be, I'm not looking to quench that. I'm looking to, how can we work with that and integrate it? So I think just kind of bringing it back to the meta of volcanology, the way that fire can interact with some wines, I think is really interesting in cooking. I mean, there's a reason that pizza is sort of like the perfect wine dish for so many red wines. It sort of sums up those factors.
Yeah, say more about that, Pietro, in the sense of like the fats, the cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's something about the immediacy. Like I have this argument with a couple people, not argument, but a discussion, because if anybody's ever done sous vide cooking, so it's this really cool method where you can control temperatures and textures really, really well, proteins, vegetables, like all sorts of different things. And then you can reverse sear them afterward instead of, normally if you cook something in a hot pan, you're sort of hoping that you pull it out at the right moment and that it carries over just right. So something's still medium rare and the top and the bottom sort of meet in the middle to be perfect. With sous vide, low temperature cooking for many hours, you can actually have that perfectly done and have a perfect consistent texture. And then you can even just use a blowtorch to sort of sear the outside of it. And every time I have sous vide cooking, I'm like, it's missing that vibrancy. It's missing the flame. It's missing that, wok hay. It's missing that thing that really brings it to life in the cooking, which is that sort of imprecision of a really hot oven, which I think rather than a thermal circulator, like that may be the perfect cooking tool.
Are you comparing Lake County's 100-degree days to a wok?
Yeah, well,
I'm joking, but I'm also kind of like saying that I was like, wow, there's actually like, yeah, you get crazy hot temperatures there, but also you're kind of like, okay, when do I pick? When do I add if I need to, to add water, like what do I do? There's actually there is that same kind of like high heat cooking that I think it takes technique. It takes understanding of your ingredients and to do that. And I think that's something that there's probably a lot of people who, are working in high temperature vineyard sites that don't necessarily know how to maintain it. And so the food comes out, or I should say the wine comes out, bland or lacking in balance or whatever it is. So I mean, I think it is an apt point that you make there.
And we all know wines that are overly manipulated.
Sure. Yeah, to try to correct things.
Yeah.
So Dana, you heard it here first. Colossus Pizza is the perfect pairing.
Well done.
I think Todd had a question.
Well, I think Jim, you had a question first.
You mentioned the barrels were 20 years old. I don't know about barrels. Are they stainless steel? Are they oak? What kind of barrels do you use for your wine?
Yeah, they're made from oak, but a lot of wineries want the flavorings that extract from new oak barrels. A lot of Napa Valley Cabernet, high-end Pinot tends to have about 30% new oak to it, and you get a lot of spice, a lot of vanilla, cedar tone. It depends. The wine barrel industry is a whole other Zoom thing as well. That's endlessly fascinating because different oak sources have different aromatic profiles, and it really does add a lot to wines over time. There's a reason a lot of wine consumers like oaky wines, because it really does. It beefs up the body. It adds vanilla and maple and all these other aspects to wine that really flesh it out. But like cooking, you know, it's a trade-off. Everything is a trade-off. So it's cool to add those extra things, but you know, if for me focusing on single varietal grapes, it starts detracting or overriding the factors that make a grape, you know, the uniqueness of the grape. So it's a stylistic choice. But with those oak barrels, the first 2 or 3 years, they have a lot of those flavoring compounds in them. But after that, the wine sort of leaches them all out, and they basically just become an empty vessel that happens to breathe just at the right rate for red wines. So for me, old barrels that are carefully maintained, and occasionally you do get one, so you just have to, you've repaired them enough and you bang on the hoops and try to patch any holes, and eventually you need to get rid of them. But you know, for me, a barrel is good for 20 or 25 years.
But you reuse them then, obviously.
You reuse them, yeah.
Okay.
And you don't want to store them empty. So a lot of my bottling goes on right before harvest, just to try to keep that time as low as possible. And you can fill them with water and things like that to keep them hydrated as well. And there are even some peculiar techniques, like in Burgundy, where you leave the dead yeast in them, and then pound what's called a bung, just to keep so the yeast will actually absorb the oxygen and create sort of an anaerobic environment in them. You store them dirty, but it actually keeps them clean. So it's, yeah. And then some areas like Bordeaux, they use thinner stave. So instead of being thick like Burgundy, they'll be narrower because that Cabernet Merlot wants more oxygen exposure. I have some from Slovenia that are like this. They're super, super thick. And someday I'll be at a place where we will have the large upright oak casks like they use in other places. That would be my first choice. Or concrete tanks. I think concrete can be pretty amazing as well.
Yeah. Well, I know we're approaching time here. If there's any other, one question from Eloise. Pietro, where did you study winemaking? And I think that'll be our last question for the night. So then we'll let Pietro get back to his evening here. But yeah, if you.
I did.
In the South.
No classes. There's a lot of information out there, and although a lot of people have, you know, I haven't worked for a large winery where I had actual mentors, but there were a couple winemakers who I found their writings particularly engaging, like Clark Smith, who wrote a book called Postmodern Winemaking, which is really interesting. As much as I don't like the title of it, I do recommend it for anybody who's interested about the winemaking process. But I was observing all these things on my own, and then he started writing about them in parallel, because I was just sort of like sequestered up in Lake County observing barrels. And it's like, when I add sulfur, I noticed this. And he started writing about, hey, you know, we're noticing the chemistry isn't actually right, what we think sulfur does. And, you know, my own observations were being supported by some of his writings. So that was like super timely and helped me to get into this less is more sort of, you know, because these are unfined, unfiltered, but pretty classical style, which is just what I like. But it takes a little bit of cautious management to get there. So some people do pretty hands-off and do amazing things. Other people do hands-off winemaking, and it can go sideways pretty easily. So.
And Pietro, for folks that are on the call and anybody who might be, you know, seeing this on YouTube later on, how can people learn more about Prima Materia and access to?
We do have a website, prima-materia.com. If you like this wine, we do have a website sale going on, and if you buy a case, shipping is free. If you live within 10 miles of Oakland, I'll even deliver it to your door. And if you're interested in learning more about the Italian grapes, there's quite a bit written on the website, but we also have a couple of podcasts up, and had an interview talking about Sangiovese with Wine Enthusiast recently. Had a little write up in the San Francisco Chronicle talking about non-vintage Nebbiolo, expanding on the non-vintage things a little bit too. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're small, but we are findable.
Are you
And-
and
and
you're
I
still
think
doing your
you're,
tasting room? Yeah, and people can come.
Yeah, so we do have a
people in the
tasting
area.
room in Oakland.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you're in the Bay Area, come see me on Sunday.
And Pietro, I know you're also, on social media, Instagram, and
Not as much as I should be.
but Pietro also has a lot of other cuvées besides the Aglianico that we showcase in the club as well. So if you wanna, yeah.
Yeah, we have a pretty full spectrum of the Italian cultivars, and a little bit of like Lake County is great for Grenache. So I've got this beautiful light bright Grenache to a couple of rosés. Strangely enough, the property on that map, the very first thing planted was Chardonnay back in '94.
Oh, wow.
And we actually have a nice stainless oak-free Chardonnay that we make every year too.
Awesome.
Right at the same time those guys were trying to get in the mountain. 1994 was a big year.
Yeah.
Right.
That might have been the moment.
Well, Pietro, thank you so much for joining us. It's really
Yeah,
been.
thank you for having me. It's great, and I love the other wines that you have too. I mean, this is such an interesting topic. Like you can really geek out over it. We didn't even talk about like, do vines actually absorb minerals, and are the volcanic soils? How do they translate into the wine?
I can see we're going to do this again. We've been talking about doing a Wines of North America club and kind of getting more into some of the stories and culture and mythology of the Americas, and no doubt, Pietro, we're going to continue this, and let's do an event again soon. We've also done some wonderful events. Dante's Inferno still looms large in the
Yeah, speaking of the intersection of your cooking and winemaking ability, I mean, those were some pretty fantastic meals that you put together along with the wines we picked out. So that was great when we did those.
Yeah, you guys had amazing presentations.
Pre-COVID. Yeah.
Right. The before days,
And stay tuned. We'll do a special offer for wines for December, just a small special offer. So, and if you want some more of Pietro's Aglianico, just let us know. As well as we can work with Pietro to ship you other wines that you would want to try from his selection.
Yeah, just send us the usual, just send us an email, info@ancientwineguys, and we'll to start the conversation with whatever we can do to get you serviced. So
well, on that note, thank you to everybody. Thanks again, like I said, for joining us. Pietro is awesome as always. And thanks for all the great wine and the great information.
Might be our last tasting before the holidays, right?
It is our last.
It is our last thing, because we'll see you in
2024. My goodness.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Well, happy holidays to everybody. Hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Best to everybody out there. For the holiday season, and we'll see you in 2024.
Keep posted for maybe like a special holiday special offer or something like that as well. We're working on something in the next week or two. But
come with us to Greece in March.
that's
there's still 4 spots available. 4 spots. So it's going fast, but we're really excited about that as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, with that, we'll say good night, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next time. So thanks again, and everybody take care.
Thanks, Pietro.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pietro. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.